4-year-old boy wakes up screaming in the middle of the night in Oklahoma, tears streaming down his face, his small body trembling with terror.
I want to go home. I want to go back to Hollywood.
His parents, Cindy and Kevin Hammonds, conservative Christians who've never even been to California, rush into his room, their hearts pounding. Ryan has never watched old movies. He's never heard of 1940s Hollywood. But what this child says next makes their blood run cold.
Mommy, I'm not Ryan. I used to be someone else. I danced on Broadway, made movies, and had a big house in Hollywood.
Cindy freezes, her hand still on the light switch. Kevin stands in the doorway, unable to move. This isn't the first time. It's been happening for weeks. And tonight, Ryan is about to reveal details that no 4-year-old child should possibly know. Details that will lead to one of the most documented reincarnation cases in scientific history. Welcome to Reincarnation Chronicles, where we explore verified cases of souls remembering their past lives. Real people, real proof, real chills. Subscribe and join us on this journey beyond death. Let's begin. It started 3 weeks earlier on a Tuesday night. Cindy had just finished reading Ryan his bedtime story, a simple tale about talking animals, nothing unusual. She kissed his forehead, turned off the lamp, and closed the door halfway, the way he liked it. The house settled into its familiar nighttime silence. Kevin was downstairs watching the news. Everything was normal. Until 2:47 a.m. Ryan's scream shattered the silence like breaking glass. Not a child's nightmare scream. This was different. This was desperate, raw, filled with a grief that didn't belong in a 4-year-old's throat. Cindy bolted upright in bed, her maternal instincts firing before her conscious mind caught up. She was at Ryan's door in seconds, Kevin right behind her. What they saw stopped them cold. Ryan was sitting upright in bed, his eyes open, but looking at something they couldn't see. His face was wet with tears, but his expression, God, his expression was all wrong. It wasn't childlike fear. It was adult anguish. The kind you see in someone who's lost everything. "Baby, what's wrong?" Cindy rushed to him, pulling him into her arms. His small body was rigid, resistant. "You don't understand," Ryan said, and his voice. Cindy would later tell Dr. Tucker this detail, the one that haunted her most. His voice sounded older. "I don't belong here. My real family is in Hollywood. I need to go back. They're waiting for me." Kevin exchanged a glance with Cindy over their son's head. "Son, you had a bad dream. You're safe. You're home." "No!" Ryan pulled away, his dark eyes blazing with frustration. "This isn't my home. My home has white columns and a kidney-shaped pool. I had an office on the second floor with pictures of famous people on the walls. I had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. I had a wife with blonde hair who was so beautiful." The words tumbled out of him like water from a broken dam. Details. So many details. Things a child raised in rural Oklahoma who'd never even seen the ocean couldn't possibly know. Cindy felt her hands start to shake. "Ryan, honey, where did you hear about these things?" "I didn't hear about them, Mommy. I remember them. I lived them." He looked at her with such profound sadness that she felt something crack inside her chest. "When I was big, I wore expensive suits. I worked with movie stars. I drove fancy cars. And then my heart stopped beating, and I was gone. And now I'm here, and I'm small again, and I don't understand why. Kevin, practical Kevin, who fixed cars for a living and believed only in what he could see and touch, felt the world tilt beneath his feet. Cindy, maybe we should call Dr. Patterson in the morning. This isn't normal. But Ryan wasn't finished. I was 61 when I died. I remember being in the hospital. The walls were green. There was a nice nurse. I knew I wasn't going to go home. I tried to hold on, but my heart just stopped. 3 hours they sat there. 3 hours of their 4-year-old son describing a life, a death, a world that should have been impossible for him to know. When Ryan finally fell back asleep near dawn, exhausted from grief that wasn't his own, Cindy and Kevin remained in his room, watching him breathe, questioning everything they thought they knew about reality. "What's happening to our son?" Cindy whispered. Kevin had no answer. For the first time in his life, his faith in simple, concrete explanations was shaken to its core. The nightmares didn't stop. They got worse. Every night, sometimes multiple times a night, Ryan would wake up crying for Hollywood, for his real family, for a life that had ended decades before he was born. Cindy started keeping a journal, documenting everything. At first, it was just to track patterns, to show the pediatrician, to prove to themselves they weren't going crazy. September 15th. Ryan woke up at 1:30 a.m., said he missed his agency. Described something called talent representation. How does he know these words? September 18th. Talked about Broadway shows, named specific theaters. Kevin looked them up. They're all real theaters from the 1940s. September 22nd. Drew a picture of his old house. The architecture is Art Deco style. We don't have any books with that kind of architecture. Where is he seeing this? The journal entries became more desperate as September bled into October. Ryan wasn't just having nightmares anymore, he was changing. At preschool, his teacher, Mrs. Henderson, pulled Cindy aside one afternoon. "Mrs. Hammonds, can I speak with you about Ryan?" Cindy's stomach dropped. "Is something wrong?" "Not wrong exactly, just unusual." Mrs. Henderson chose her words carefully. "Today, during story time, we were reading about community helpers, doctors, firefighters, teachers. Ryan raised his hand and started talking about something called contract negotiations and percentage points in the entertainment industry. He used terms like residuals and back-end deals. I have a theater degree, Mrs. Hammonds. Those are legitimate industry terms. How does a 4-year-old know about back-end deals?" Cindy had no answer. How could she explain what she didn't understand herself? At night, Kevin began praying more fervently than he ever had in his life. They were devout Christians. They believed in heaven and hell, in one life followed by eternal judgment. Reincarnation was something from Eastern religions, something that contradicted everything their church taught. But their son was suffering, trapped between two identities, grieving for people he'd never met in this lifetime. Maybe it's demonic, Kevin suggested one desperate night after Ryan had cried himself to sleep. Maybe something is influencing him. But Cindy shook her head. The things Ryan described weren't evil. They were mundane, domestic, full of love. He talked about playing with his children in the garden, about loving his wife, about the satisfaction of helping actors succeed, about morning swims in his pool before heading to the office. These weren't the whispers of darkness. They were the memories of a life lived, a life loved, a life lost. I think, Cindy said slowly, terrified of the words even as she spoke them. I think our son is telling the truth. I think somehow, impossibly, he really did live before. The admission hung in the air between them like smoke. Ryan started having different kinds of episodes during the day. He'd be playing with his toy cars, and suddenly he'd stop, his face going distant. I used to drive a Cadillac, he'd say to no one in particular. It was cream-colored with white leather seats. I felt like a king driving it down Sunset Boulevard. Or he'd be eating breakfast and suddenly push away his cereal. We used to eat at this restaurant, Chasen's. They made the best chili. All the stars went there. I knew the owner personally. Cindy would look up these details later, her hands shaking as she typed into the library computer. Chasen's was real. It was a famous Hollywood restaurant in the 1940s and 50s. It closed in 1995, 7 years before Ryan was born. The breaking point came in late October. Ryan had been particularly distressed all week, crying about missing his real children, saying they were grown-ups now and he'd never see them again. On Friday night, Cindy made a decision that would change everything. I'm going to the library tomorrow, she told Kevin. I'm going to find books about old Hollywood. Maybe if he sees pictures, if we can figure out what he's talking about, maybe it will help him. Maybe he needs to make sense of this somehow. Kevin wanted to argue, wanted to say they should just pray harder, have the pastor come pray over Ryan, cast out whatever was causing this. But he looked at his wife's determined face, the desperation in her eyes, and he nodded. Okay, but Cindy, what if you find something? What if he recognizes something real? Then, Cindy said, her voice steady despite her terror. Then we'll know we're not crazy, and we'll figure out what to do next. Saturday morning, Cindy drove to the Muskogee Public Library alone. She told Kevin she needed to do this by herself, though she couldn't explain why. Maybe because part of her still hoped she'd find nothing, that Ryan's detailed descriptions wouldn't match any reality, and they could dismiss this as elaborate childhood fantasy. The library was nearly empty, just a few college students studying in corners and an elderly librarian at the front desk. Cindy approached hesitantly. Can you help me find books about old Hollywood? 1940s, 1950s era? The librarian, a woman named Margaret with kind eyes behind thick glasses, smiled. We searching for something specific? You could say that. Cindy wasn't ready to explain, wasn't ready to say the words out loud. My son thinks he used to be someone else. Margaret led her to a section in the back, pulling out several heavy volumes. These are our best collections. Lots of photographs, behind-the-scenes information about the studio system, biographies of stars from that era. Cindy's hands trembled as she took the books. One was titled The Golden Age of Hollywood, 1920 to 1960. The cover showed a glamorous actress in a sequined gown, frozen in time, smiling at something outside the frame. Thank you, Cindy managed. She didn't open the books at the library. Couldn't. Instead, she checked them out and drove home with them sitting on the passenger seat like a bomb waiting to detonate. That evening, after dinner, after Ryan's bath, after they'd gotten him into his pajamas and settled him on the couch with a blanket, Cindy brought out the first book. Ryan, honey, I want to show you something. Ryan looked up from his stuffed elephant, his eyes curious. Kevin sat in the armchair across from them, his jaw tight, his hands clasped together so hard his knuckles were white. Cindy opened the book to a random page, a black and white photograph of a film set, cameras and crew members, a woman in 1940s fashion posing for the lens. Ryan leaned forward, studying the image. "That's a Paramount set," he said matter-of-factly. "You can tell by the lighting equipment they used. We worked with them sometimes. They had good people." Cindy turned the page. More photos. Ryan commented on each one, not excitedly, not like a child seeing something new, but like someone flipping through an old yearbook, recognizing familiar faces and places. "That's Macombo nightclub. I went there for client parties." "That's RKO Studios, different lighting style than Paramount." "That's Ciro's on Sunset Strip. Frank Sinatra performed there." Page after page, Kevin felt like he was in a dream, watching his 4-year-old son casually identify places and things he should have no knowledge of. But Cindy kept turning pages, driven by something she couldn't name: hope, fear, desperate need for answers. And then, on page 158, everything stopped. Ryan's hand shot out, grabbing Cindy's wrist with surprising strength. "Wait! Go back!" Cindy's heart hammered as she turned back one page. It was a still from a 1940s movie. She hadn't even read the caption yet. The black and white image showed several men in suits standing around a table, cigarette smoke hanging in the air, the aesthetic of film noir frozen in time. "Mommy," Ryan whispered, his finger trembling as he pointed to one man in the right side of the frame. "Mommy, that's me." The world stopped spinning. Cindy stared at the man Ryan was pointing to. He wasn't the main focus of the photo, just one of several background figures. Dark hair, nice suit, the kind of face that would be easy to miss. But Ryan's finger was pressed against the page with absolute certainty. "That's my face. That's how I looked." Ryan's voice broke. "I remember when they took this picture. We were filming a nightclub scene. I had 3 lines. I was so nervous because I wasn't really an actor. I was an agent, but they needed extra people for the background." Kevin stood up, came closer, stared at the photo. "Ryan, are you sure?" Ryan looked up at his father, and in his eyes was something no child should possess: absolute, world-weary certainty. "Daddy, I know my own face. That's me, when I was big, when I was alive before." Cindy found her voice, barely. What was your name before?" Ryan thought for a moment, his brow furrowing with effort. "I don't remember my name clearly, but I worked at a big agency. We represented stars. I had an office with pictures. I had a wife, children, a house with a pool shaped like a kidney. And I died when my heart stopped. And then I was a baby again. And now I'm here. And that's me in that picture. I know it is." Cindy looked at the caption under the photo. It listed the movie title, a B movie from 1945 called Night After Night, and named the main actors, but the background figures weren't identified. The man Ryan claimed to be was anonymous, unnamed, lost to history. Except he wasn't lost. He was sitting on a couch in Oklahoma, 4 years old, pointing at his own face from 7 decades ago. Kevin sank back into his chair. Cindy closed the book with shaking hands. And Ryan, finally having been believed, having found proof that he wasn't crazy, that his memories were real, laid his head on his mother's shoulder and cried with relief. "You believe me now?" he whispered. "Yes, baby," Cindy said, tears streaming down her face. "We believe you." But belief brought new terror. Because if Ryan was telling the truth, if he really had lived before, if that really was his face in that photograph, then everything they thought they knew about life, death, and the soul was wrong. And more than that, somewhere out there, that man had lived a full life. He'd had a family. He'd died. And somehow, impossibly, he was back. The question that would haunt Cindy for weeks came then. Who was that man? And how do we find out? The photograph changed everything. That night, after Ryan finally fell asleep, clutching the book to his chest like a lifeline, Cindy and Kevin sat at their kitchen table in silence. The clock above the stove ticked past midnight, past 1 a.m., past 2. Neither of them could sleep. How could they? Their entire understanding of reality had just shattered like glass. "We need help," Cindy finally said, her voice hoarse from crying. "Professional help. But not a psychiatrist. They'll just say he's delusional. We need someone who studies this." Kevin rubbed his face with both hands. His faith, his rock-solid Christian faith that had guided him through 38 years of life, was crumbling. "Reincarnation isn't real, Cindy. The Bible says we die once, then comes judgment. There's no coming back." "Then explain our son," Cindy shot back, more harshly than she intended. "Explain how he knows things he couldn't possibly know. Explain how he pointed to a man in a 1945 photograph and said, 'That's me,' with more certainty than I've ever heard in his voice. Explain that, Kevin." He couldn't. God help him, he couldn't. The next morning, while Ryan played in his room, Cindy did what any desperate mother in the internet age would do. She searched. Her fingers trembled over the keyboard as she typed, "Children remembering past lives, reincarnation research, scientific study past life memories." Most results were New Age websites, spiritual gurus, things that made her instinctively recoil. But then she found something different. An article from a medical journal, academic, scientific. The University of Virginia's Division of Perceptual Studies. A psychiatrist named Dr. Jim Tucker, who had documented over 2,000 cases of children claiming to remember previous lives. Cindy read every word, her heart pounding. Dr. Tucker didn't approach these cases with mysticism or religion. He approached them like a detective, gathering evidence, verifying facts, documenting details. He'd published papers in peer-reviewed journals. He was legitimate. Her hand shook as she picked up the phone. It took 3 tries to dial the number correctly. A secretary answered, professional and polite. "Division of Perceptual Studies, how may I help you?" I need to speak with Dr. Tucker. It's about my son. He remembers things from before he was born." There was a pause. The secretary had probably heard this 100 times. "Can you describe the nature of the memories?" Cindy took a deep breath and told her everything. The nightmares, the details about Hollywood, the photograph. When she finished, the secretary's tone had changed, less routine, more intrigued. "Dr. Tucker will want to hear about this. Can you hold while I transfer you?" 15 minutes later, Cindy hung up the phone in a daze. Dr. Jim Tucker, one of the world's leading researchers on reincarnation, had agreed to come to Oklahoma to meet Ryan, to investigate what he'd called a potentially significant case. "He's coming here?" Kevin asked, disbelief written across his face. "Next week. He said cases with photographic evidence are rare. He wants to document everything." Ryan appeared in the doorway, his stuffed elephant dragging behind him. Is someone going to help me remember my name? I want to know my name from before. Cindy knelt down, pulling her son into her arms. Yes, baby. A very smart doctor is going to help us figure this out. I promise. But even as she made that promise, fear coiled in her stomach. What if they found out who the man in the photograph was? What if Ryan's memories were verified, proven real beyond any doubt? What would that mean for their faith, their understanding of God's plan, their entire worldview? She pushed the thoughts away. Right now, her son needed answers. Everything else could wait. The week before Dr. Tucker's arrival felt like an eternity. Ryan's nightmares intensified, as if knowing help was coming had loosened something inside him. He'd wake up sobbing about his grown children, about deals he'd made with studios, about the feeling of his heart failing in that green-walled hospital room. Cindy documented everything in her journal, knowing Dr. Tucker would want detailed records. She wrote down Ryan's descriptions of his office, his home, his work, his family. The details were so specific, so vivid. He described how contract negotiations worked in 1940s Hollywood. He talked about percentage points and back-end deals, and the difference between representing actors versus directors. He mentioned restaurants that Cindy had to Google to confirm they'd even existed. Chasen's, Romanoff's, the Brown Derby. How does he know these things? She whispered to Kevin one night. How? Kevin had stopped trying to explain it away. He'd moved past denial into a kind of numb acceptance that their neat, orderly understanding of the universe was wrong. They were living in a world where souls could return, where death wasn't an ending, but a transition. It terrified him. When Dr. Jim Tucker finally arrived on a crisp Tuesday morning in November, Cindy was surprised by how normal he looked. She'd expected someone more eccentric, maybe wearing crystals or talking about chakras. Instead, Dr. Tucker was a slim man in his 50s with graying hair, wearing slacks and a button-down shirt, carrying a leather briefcase. He looked like a professor, which technically he was. Mrs. Hammonds, he shook her hand with a firm grip. Thank you for contacting us. I've reviewed the notes you sent. This is a fascinating case. Fascinating. As if her son's torment was a puzzle to solve, an academic curiosity. But Cindy bit back her irritation. This man was here to help. That's what mattered. Ryan was in the living room, sitting on the couch with the Hollywood book open on his lap. He'd been looking at that photograph every day, as if staring at it hard enough would bring back more memories. When Dr. Tucker entered, Ryan looked up with those old, sad eyes. Hello, Ryan, Dr. Tucker said gently, sitting down across from him. Your mom told me you remember living before, in Hollywood. Ryan studied the doctor carefully, sizing him up with an intensity that made Cindy's breath catch. Then he nodded slowly. I did live there. I'm not lying. I don't think you're lying, Dr. Tucker said, and the sincerity in his voice seemed to break something loose in Ryan. The boy's shoulders relaxed slightly. I've talked to a lot of children like you, children who remember other lives. You're not alone, and you're not crazy. I want to help you, but I need to ask you a lot of questions. Is that okay? Will you help me find my family? My real family from before? Dr. Tucker's expression softened with compassion. I'm going to try, but first, I need you to tell me everything you remember, every single detail, even if it seems small or unimportant. Can you do that? Ryan nodded and took a deep breath. And then he began to talk. For 3 hours, Dr. Tucker asked questions and took notes. while Cindy and Kevin sat nearby, listening to their son describe a life in meticulous detail. He talked about his morning routine, waking up at 6, swimming laps in his kidney-shaped pool, having breakfast served by a housekeeper named Margaret. He described driving to his office in Beverly Hills, the layout of the building, the faces of his colleagues. He talked about lunches with stars at Chasen's, about negotiating contracts, about the satisfaction of making a deal that would launch someone's career. "What about your family?" Dr. Tucker asked. "Your wife, your children. Can you tell me about them?" Ryan's face crumpled with grief. "My wife was beautiful. Blonde hair, blue eyes. She smiled a lot, but sometimes she was sad because I worked too much. My children, I had 2 sons and a daughter. The oldest boy liked cars. The younger one was quieter, read a lot of books. My daughter was the baby. She used to sit on my lap in my office and play with my tie." Tears streamed down Ryan's cheeks. "I loved them so much. But then I got sick. My heart started hurting. The doctors said I needed to slow down, but I didn't listen. I kept working. And then one day I was in the hospital, and the pain was so bad, and I knew I was dying, and I was so scared because I didn't want to leave them." Dr. Tucker's hand paused over his notepad. In all his years of research, he'd rarely seen a child express such profound, adult grief. "Do you remember dying?" Ryan nodded, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The walls were green. There was a nurse holding my hand. She had kind eyes. My wife was crying. I tried to tell her I loved her, but I couldn't talk anymore. And then everything went dark. And then I was a baby. And Cindy was there, but she wasn't my wife. She was my new mom. And I was confused because I was supposed to be dead." The room was silent except for Cindy's quiet sobbing. Kevin had his head in his hands. Even Dr. Tucker, who'd heard hundreds of similar accounts, seemed shaken. "Ryan," Dr. Tucker said carefully, "do you remember how old you were when you died?" 61. I was 61 years old." "And what year did you die?" Ryan frowned, concentrating hard. I don't remember exactly, but I remember Kennedy was president. People were sad about Kennedy dying. It was around that time." Dr. Tucker wrote that down, his mind already calculating. Kennedy was assassinated in 1963. If Ryan died around that time at age 61, that would mean he was born around 1902. The timeline fit with 1940s Hollywood. He would have been in his 40s during that era, prime working age. "And your name?" Dr. Tucker asked, though he knew this was often the hardest thing for children to remember. "Do you remember what people called you?" Ryan squeezed his eyes shut, straining with effort. They called me Marty? Maybe Marty? It's hard. It's like trying to remember a dream, Marty." Dr. Tucker underlined the name in his notes. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Combined with the photograph from the 1945 movie, with all these specific details about Hollywood agency work, with the timeline of death in the mid-1960s, it might be enough. It might actually be enough to identify this person. "Ryan," Dr. Tucker said, closing his notepad and looking the boy directly in the eyes, "I'm going to do everything I can to find out who you were. I'm going to find your family, but you need to be patient with me. It might take time. Can you be patient?" Ryan wiped his eyes and nodded. "Thank you, Doctor. Thank you for believing me." After Ryan was sent to play in his room, Dr. Tucker sat with Cindy and Kevin in the kitchen. "I won't lie to you," he said quietly. "This is one of the most detailed cases I've encountered. The specificity of his memories, the emotional affect, the photograph, it's all very compelling. If what Ryan is saying is true, if we can verify these details, this could be significant documentation of consciousness surviving bodily death." "Can you find him?" Cindy asked desperately. "The man in the photo?" "I'm going to try. I'll need to take the book back to Virginia with me. My research team will analyze the photograph, try to identify everyone in it. We'll cross-reference with studio records, agency rosters from the 1940s, death certificates from the 1960s. It's detective work, essentially, and it takes time." "How much time?" Kevin asked. Dr. Tucker shook his head. "I can't say. Could be weeks, could be months. But I promise you, I won't stop looking until we have answers." That night, after Dr. Tucker had left with the book carefully packed in his briefcase, Cindy found Ryan sitting by his bedroom window, staring out at the Oklahoma darkness. "What are you thinking about, baby?" "I'm thinking about my wife. My old wife. I wonder if she's still alive. She'd be really old now, probably. Or maybe she died too and got reborn, like me. I hope she's happy, wherever she is." Cindy sat down next to him, wrapping her arm around his small shoulders. "Dr. Tucker is going to find answers. I believe that." "Mommy?" Ryan looked up at her. "If he finds my old family, and they're real, and I was real, does that mean when I die again, I'll come back as someone else? Will I forget you like I forgot them?" The question hit Cindy like a physical blow. She'd been so focused on helping Ryan, on finding answers, that she hadn't considered this terrifying implication. If souls reincarnated, if Ryan had lived before, then yes, someday he would die and potentially be reborn again. And he might forget her the same way he'd forgotten his previous family. She'd lose him. Not to death, but to rebirth, which was somehow worse. "I don't know, baby," she whispered honestly. "I don't know how any of this works." "I don't want to forget you," Ryan said, and started crying. "You're my mom, my real mom now. I don't want to forget." They held each other and cried. Two souls trying to make sense of an existence far more complex and mysterious than either had imagined. Outside, the Oklahoma wind howled, indifferent to their struggle, indifferent to the questions that had no easy answers. Across the country in Charlottesville, Virginia, Dr. Jim Tucker sat in his office long past midnight. The photograph from the 1945 movie spread out on his desk under a bright lamp. He'd spent hours staring at the man Ryan claimed to be, trying to see what a 4-year-old child saw. The face was ordinary, unremarkable. Dark hair slicked back in the style of the era, a nice suit, the hint of a smile. Just another Hollywood hopeful caught in the background of someone else's story. But if Ryan was right, this unremarkable face belonged to a man named Marty, who had lived a full life, had a family, died at 61, and somehow, impossibly, come back. Dr. Tucker had spent 20 years studying cases like this, had documented hundreds of children with verified past life memories. But something about Ryan's case felt different. The level of detail, the profound grief, the photographic evidence. He picked up his phone and called his research assistant. "Carol, I'm sending you a photograph. I need you to identify every person in it. Start with studio records from 1945. cross-reference with talent agencies, and pull death certificates for any matches who died in the early to mid-1960s from cardiac causes. I want to know who these people are. How urgent is this? Carol asked, used to her boss's late-night obsessions. Very. We might be looking at one of the most documented reincarnation cases in history. I need to know who this man is. I'll start first thing in the morning. Dr. Tucker hung up and looked again at the photograph. Who were you, Marty? He whispered to the frozen image. And how did you find your way back? The man in the photograph, forever young at 40-something, smiled his slight smile and kept his secrets. But Dr. Jim Tucker was patient. He'd spent 2 decades hunting for answers in the impossible spaces between life and death. He would find this man's identity. He would give Ryan his answers, no matter how long it took. In the silence of his office, surrounded by files of other children who claimed to remember other lives, Dr. Tucker felt the weight of what he was attempting. If he could prove Ryan's memories were real, if he could verify every detail, document every connection, it would be evidence that consciousness, that essential spark of self, truly did survive death. That we were all more than flesh and blood. That we were eternal. It was terrifying. It was magnificent. And it was waiting to be proven. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks of silence from Dr. Tucker while Ryan's nightmares continued. 3 weeks of Cindy checking her email obsessively, her phone constantly in her hand, hoping for news. 3 weeks of Kevin praying in their bedroom late at night, asking God to make sense of the impossible. And then, on a cold December morning, Dr. Tucker called. "Mrs. Hammonds, we found him." Cindy's legs nearly gave out. She grabbed the kitchen counter for support. You found him?" His name was Marty Martin. He worked as a Hollywood talent agent in the 1940s and 50s. He also took small acting roles occasionally, which is why he appeared in that 1945 film. He died in 1964 at age 61 from a heart attack. Dr. Tucker's voice was shaking with excitement. "Mrs. Hammonds, everything Ryan said is true. The timeline matches, the occupation matches. We found his death certificate. And we found his family." Cindy couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Her 4-year-old son had been telling the truth. All of it. Every impossible detail. "His family?" she whispered. He had 3 children, 2 sons and 1 daughter, and a wife named, well, her name was actually on the marriage certificate as a blonde woman, based on photos we found. "Mrs. Hammonds, I need your permission to contact Marty Martin's surviving family. His daughter is still alive. She's in her 70s now. I want to arrange a meeting, but only if you and Ryan are comfortable with it." Comfortable? How could anyone be comfortable with this? But Ryan deserved answers. He deserved closure. Yes, please contact them." "There's one more thing," Dr. Tucker said carefully. "I need you to prepare yourself. When we verify these cases, when we prove them beyond doubt, it changes everything. Your faith, your understanding of reality, it all shifts. Are you ready for that?" Cindy looked out the kitchen window at Ryan playing in the backyard, a small boy throwing a ball in the Oklahoma winter, carrying the soul of a man who died before he was born. "I don't think I have a choice, Dr. Tucker. My son needs this. We all need this." 2 weeks later, they were on a plane to California. Ryan had never flown before. He pressed his face against the window, watching Oklahoma disappear beneath the clouds. And Cindy saw something in his expression. Recognition, longing, a sense of going home that broke her heart. "Are you nervous?" she asked him. Ryan shook his head. "No, I'm excited. I get to see them again, my children. They're not children anymore, but they're mine." The meeting was arranged at a hotel in Los Angeles, neutral ground where everyone could feel safe. Dr. Tucker was already there when the Hammonds arrived, along with 2 other people, a woman in her 70s with silver hair and kind eyes, and a man about the same age with Marty Martin's same jawline. "Mrs. Hammonds," Dr. Tucker made introductions. "This is Margaret Martin, Marty's daughter, and this is David Martin, his youngest son." Margaret stared at Ryan with tears already streaming down her face. "He has my father's eyes. Oh God, he has his eyes." Ryan walked forward slowly, studying them with that old soul intensity. "You're Margaret. You used to play in the garden. You had a doll with blonde hair that you carried everywhere. And you," he looked at David, "you liked to read. You had a whole shelf of comic books in your room." David's face went white. How could you possibly know that?" "Because I'm your father. I was your father. I remember you." Ryan's voice cracked. "You were so small. I used to watch you from my office window while you played. I wanted to spend more time with you, but I worked too much. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I worked too much." Margaret collapsed into a chair, sobbing. "Daddy used to say that. In the last months before he died, he kept saying he wished he'd spent more time with us, that work had stolen too many years." Dr. Tucker opened his briefcase and pulled out a photo album. "Margaret brought this. Family photos that have never been published, never been seen by anyone outside the family. Ryan, would you look at these?" Ryan took the album with trembling hands. The first page showed a man, Marty Martin, standing in front of a beautiful house with white columns. Behind him, clearly visible, was a kidney-shaped pool. "That's my house," Ryan whispered. "That's exactly how it looked." He turned the page. 3 small children playing in a garden. "My babies. You were so little." His fingers traced the image of a young Margaret. "You loved that garden. There were roses. Yellow roses were your favorite." Margaret gasped. "I'd forgotten about the roses. But yes, they were yellow. Daddy planted them for me." Page after page, Ryan identified details no one had told him, memories that existed only in these private photographs. He pointed to a woman with blonde hair. "That's my wife. She's beautiful. Is she?" "She passed away in 1998, David said gently. "But she lived a good life. She remarried, was happy." Ryan nodded, accepting this with a maturity that didn't belong in a 6-year-old's body. "I'm glad. I wanted her to be happy." They spent 4 hours together that day. Ryan told stories that only Marty Martin could have known. Private jokes, family traditions, the layout of rooms in their house. Conversations that had never been recorded anywhere. With each verified detail, the impossible became undeniable. At one point, Margaret pulled out a specific photograph. "This was taken 3 months before Daddy died, in the hospital." Ryan took the photo and his whole body tensed. "The walls were green. That nurse," he pointed to a woman in the background. "She held my hand. She told me it would be okay, that I shouldn't be afraid." "The hospital did have green walls," David confirmed, his voice breaking. And there was a nurse who was particularly kind to Dad in his final days. I remember her. I was scared, Ryan said, tears falling. I knew I was dying. My heart hurt so much. I tried to tell you I loved you, but I couldn't talk. I wanted you to know. Margaret grabbed Ryan's small hands. We knew, Daddy. We knew you loved us. We always knew. The validation, the acceptance, the proof that his memories were real. Something shifted in Ryan that day. The desperate grief that had haunted him for 2 years began to ease. He wasn't crazy. He wasn't alone. He had lived. He had died. And somehow, miraculously, he had returned. Before they left, David gave Ryan something. This was Dad's watch. Mom kept it all these years. I think he'd want you to have it. Ryan held the watch like it was made of glass. I remember this. I wore it every day. We know, Margaret said, smiling through tears. We know you did. The flight back to Oklahoma was different. Ryan slept peacefully for the first time in months. No nightmares. No crying out for a home that no longer existed. Cindy watched him sleep and felt something profound settle in her chest. Not understanding exactly, but acceptance. The universe was stranger and more beautiful than she'd ever imagined. Over the following months, something remarkable happened. Ryan's memories of being Marty Martin began to fade, like a vivid dream losing detail in daylight. He stopped waking up at night, stopped talking obsessively about Hollywood, started being just Ryan, a kid who liked dinosaurs and video games and playing soccer with his friends. Do you still remember being Marty? Cindy asked him one morning, 6 months after the California meeting. Ryan thought about it, chewing his cereal slowly. Kind of. It's fuzzy now, like watching a movie about someone else. I know it happened, I know it was real, but it doesn't hurt anymore. I'm just me now. Dr. Tucker explained this was common. Once children receive validation, once they understand their memories are real and not dismissed as fantasy, they can integrate the experience and move forward. Ryan needed to know he wasn't crazy. Now he knows, and he can be a child again. The case was published in the Journal of Scientific Exploration. Dr. Tucker had documented 55 specific details Ryan provided that were subsequently verified as accurate. 55 impossible pieces of knowledge about a man who died 7 years before Ryan was born. The paper sent shockwaves through the academic community. Margaret and David stayed in touch with the Hammonds, not as father and children. That dynamic was too complex, too strange, but as friends, connected by something extraordinary. Once a year, they'd visit, sharing stories about Marty, keeping his memory alive while letting Ryan be Ryan. You gave us the greatest gift, Margaret told Cindy during one visit. We got to say goodbye properly. We got to know that death isn't the end, that consciousness continues, that our Father, in some beautiful, mysterious way, is still out there, still learning, still growing. Cindy's faith had transformed. She still believed in God, still went to church, but now she understood that the universe was bigger than any one religion could capture. Death wasn't an ending, it was a transition. The soul was eternal, moving from life to life, learning, evolving, continuing its journey through existence. Ryan grew up normally. He played sports, did well in school, dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. The memories of being Marty Martin became like a half-remembered dream, present but not defining. When asked about it, he'd say simply, "Yeah, I had a past life." It was real, but I'm Ryan now. That's what matters. But sometimes, late at night, Cindy would find him looking at Marty's watch, turning it over in his hands, a distant expression on his face. "You okay, baby?" "Yeah," he'd say, smiling. "Just remembering. It's nice sometimes, remembering who I was. But I like who I am now better. This life is good." Years later, when Ryan was 15, Dr. Tucker published a book featuring his case prominently. It became a bestseller, challenging millions of people to reconsider everything they thought they knew about consciousness, death, and the persistence of the soul. Ryan did a few interviews, always thoughtful, always honest. "I don't think people should be afraid of death," he said in one interview. "I've died before. It's not scary, it's just a change. You're still you. Your soul keeps going. Love keeps going. Nothing real ever dies." The interviewer asked if he'd like to remember his past life more clearly. Ryan shook his head. "No, that life had its time. This life is mine. I'm grateful I got to give my old family closure, but I'm Ryan Hammonds. That's who I want to be." Cindy watched her son speak with such wisdom, such peace, and felt overwhelming gratitude. Her son had been given an impossible gift, the knowledge that death was not the end, that consciousness survived, that love transcended lifetimes. And he'd given that gift to her, too. The story of Ryan Hammonds and Marty Martin became one of the most well-documented reincarnation cases in scientific history. It challenged skeptics, comforted believers, and opened minds to possibilities beyond material existence. But for the people at its center, it was something simpler and more profound. It was proof that we are more than our bodies, that the essence of who we are, our consciousness, our soul, our fundamental self, continues its journey through countless lives, learning, growing, loving, and returning. Death is not an ending. It's a doorway. And on the other side, we remain ourselves, eternal and unbreakable, moving forward through the endless dance of existence. So here's my question for you. Have you ever met someone and felt like you'd known them forever? Have you ever visited a place you'd never been, but somehow recognized? Have you ever had knowledge you couldn't explain, skills that came too easily, fears or loves that made no logical sense? Maybe, just maybe, you're remembering something too. Something from before. Another life, another time, another version of yourself that your soul hasn't quite forgotten. Leave your story in the comments. Tell me about your déjà vu, your unexplainable connections, your dreams that felt too real. Your experience might be the next case we explore here on Reincarnation Chronicles. If this story moved you, if it made you question everything you thought you knew about life and death, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Share this with someone who needs to know that death is not the end, that love survives, that we are all eternal souls on an infinite journey. Until next time, remember, this life is just one chapter in your eternal story. Make it count.